Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew Fox, and uh, my co-host Riki Hayashi are talking about the question of what is anime, and to what extent is it specifically to Japanese culture? Is it a word that just means animation from Japan? Is it particular styles that don't make sense outside of Japan? How does this all tie together? It's a question that we've kind of danced around in a couple different other podcasts, and so we wanted to kind of dive deeper into it, particularly because, as you may have heard on recent episodes, part of Riki being on this podcast is we're going to be looking at anime a lot more. And I know these are issues that Riki, you have a lot of thoughts on. So let me kind of just start with this. So let me actually just start and ask you, how did you become introduced to anime, and how has it been a part of your understanding of yourself as either someone who just enjoys culture, or you're as a Japanese person, an American, etc.
I mean, I grew up with it. So I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in the United States, but my grandparents would send me video cassettes, VHS cassettes with popular anime broadcast in Japan. Like they would record these for me and send them to me, especially like if I expressed some interest in a particular
Mm.
product, particular anime. And like I was definitely more of a manga reader because it was easier at that time to get manga, the comic books
Mm-hmm.
at bookstores. There would be Japanese bookstores, and of course, like you could get anime like VHS movies and stuff, but it's a lot easier to consume.
Right.
Buy and consume a book. But I did enjoy anime. Like the first one I really remember was Kinnikuman. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that one is very well known in the United States. I think it was exported to the United States as like Muscle Man. Do you remember like the little figurines, the muscles? They're
Yes, those I
like
remember.
maybe an inch tall, made out of like some kind of rubbery plastic
Mm-hmm.
thing. Those were all based on Kinnikuman characters, and it was like a
Okay.
kind of like
Okay.
wrestling with superpowers. It's how I would
Right.
describe the aesthetic of it. And then after that, it was, of course, Dragon Ball was the most formative
Mm.
anime of my youth and like even adult life, perhaps. And like I got into a lot of other stuff, but not as much as less. Most recently, I have started to catch up, but there was definitely a gap in like 2000 to 2020, like a 20-year gap that I just like
Mhm.
didn't pay much attention or consume very much just because of where I was in my life, plus like how you can get media,
Right.
right? Like now with the streaming services, it's very easy.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a period where you either had to like buy DVDs or you had to bootleg, right? Which
Mhm.
I do not advocate.
Well, I know that for a while, like, if you bought a DVD from Japan, or a tape, it might not always be compatible with your particular machine because there were
Oh
different
yeah,
ways that.
the region coding.
Uh-huh. Things like
I
that.
remember trying to figure that out, like whether I could actually buy something.
For sure. Well, and let's kinda go back to those childhood days, because you said that your grandparents, they were recording it off the television. So,
Yeah.
where like, when it comes to American animation, especially, like, ongoing serials for kids, I tend to think of it happening at 2 times. There's the Saturday morning cartoons, and then there were the after school cartoons. And so, like, Saturday morning um, ca was things like Gummy Bears, and, uh a lot of reruns of older stuff, but a lot of other kind of like lighter shows. The stuff that was very much like He-Man and GI Joe and stuff like that was almost all like afternoon cartoons, and of course they would go into syndication and things like that. When were you? When were these cartoons broadcast on TV in Japan?
I don't really know. I mean, they would clip the newspaper. They would
Uh huh.
clip like the when it was like the name of the episode and like when it was broadcast and tape that to the outside of the box on all
Oh,
of
that's
them.
awesome.
It was I don't know if we have any left still, but it
Mhm.
was yeah, it was like there was a lot of love in it, like, looking
Yeah,
back
for sure.
now. My impre like, I've been to Japan a couple times, and I just, like, watch TV, and my impression is that a lot of it is on in the evening.
Okay.
Like, the whole Saturday morning cartoon thing, first off, like, there's school on Saturday in Japan,
Oh,
um,
okay.
and even, like, after school, like, for US cartoons, I think you and I probably watched a lot of stuff from like 3 to 6 p.m., right? Like right after
Yeah.
school, you get stuff like I remember like Darkwing Duck, DuckTales,
Yep.
the X-Men 90, the original X-Men, Batman the Animated Series, like stuff like that was on in that like right after school period. In Japan, after school, kids go to Juku, which is like a supplemental learn study hall. So
Okay.
I think a lot of the anime probably comes on like after like 6 or 7, like right after the supper time.
Okay.
Like you have supper and the kids probably get to watch some TV for an hour or 2 type
Right.
of thing. Is
And
is my impression of it.
mhm. And I think of there's shows like I think of like the Muppet Show where ostensibly it's aimed at kids, but there's also quite a lot that adults can enjoy. And obviously a lot of anime today, many adults continue to enjoy yourself and in some cases myself included. Were your grandparents people who were enjoying these shows and also taping them to you, or is it just that they knew that you liked it? They might have whatever they thought of it, but they were taping it specifically just for you.
I doubt they were watching.
Yeah.
My If I had to guess, like, they were probably, like, timer recording it, so, like, the
Mhm.
TV might not have even been on. Like,
Yep.
the VHS was just set to record at a certain time on a certain channel.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense.
so, no, like, I don't think that they were into it. Even my
Uh-huh.
parents, like, my dad, like, might have watched a couple of episodes with me, but, like, he never really understood or enjoyed.
Right.
So, I don't yeah.
Makes sense.
Generationally, I don't think I'm kind of like I feel like I grew up in the perfect time
Mm.
because like I said, Dragon Ball is still to this day one of the biggest franchises to come out of anime, right?
Yeah.
And I came along like I was like maybe like 8 or 9 years old when it started and got super into it and just enjoyed it all the way through its original run. And I've
Mhm.
tried to keep up, but eh.
Yeah. Sure. Well, you're following One Piece, and that's gotta be enough, to do 2 of them.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. The weirdest thing, I was like doing research on One Piece, and of
Mhm.
course there's the Netflix live action version, but then I've discovered that a different animation studio is like redoing One Piece from the very beginning. Yeah, that's the face I made. I like
Yeah.
why do we need this? Like it's one thing to change the medium from animation to live action and do
Mhm.
something different with the story in terms of like I've
Right.
talked about how they condensed the story. But it sounds like they're just gonna redo it like I wonder if it's
Huh.
like a shot for shot like the Psycho remake.
Is it a Japanese company?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Huh.
I think it's Sunrise.
I mean, I've often wondered I know that sometimes they'll do the remastering where, like, I think this happened with some older Disney films where they basically but even then, they're trying to make it look like the original. I guess kinda what I'm kinda thinking is if you have something where you're like, "Look, we didn't have the animation capacity at the time to really do this as well as it could have been. We're gonna keep all the same voice actors, so we'll make sure that's animated in a way." Like, I could see someone wanting to do that. It seems like a strange project, but maybe. And again, I don't
That's
even know if
true.
that's what they're
Like
doing.
anime has evolved a lot, especially like the action aspects
Mhm.
and the technical mastery of like showing the action fighting has changed so much
Oh,
that I
yeah.
could see them because I've gone back and watched like the opening episode of the One Piece anime. And it's like very dated.
Yeah.
And then I've seen clips of the newer stuff and it's like very up to date. But maybe like there's this desire because it's gone on for so long, like 20 years or whatever. They're like, Well, let's go back and like redo some of this old stuff that
Yeah.
doesn't look so good anymore.
And that's something I think I see across animation styles. In the Star Wars animation world, I know a lot of times I'll see things like, look at how beautiful the animation for the Bad Batch is, and part of that
Yeah.
is the advances in technology, and part of that is just a bigger budget. And then, like, imagine if you could do that to season one of the Clone Wars,
Yeah,
even just like
exactly.
season seven or season one. The technology is night and day
Yeah,
different.
Clone Wars got like a refresh, I feel like around season 3 or 4
I think so. Yeah.
itself. Like it got noticeably better.
That makes sense. So I want to be careful not to put words into your mouth here. For you, anime. I assume the anime you were watching was in the Japanese language, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And so, how did it feel like for you? It was a part of, and maybe you're too young to even think of these kind of terms, but or either at that point or later, like, was there a particular importance for it for you in terms of a way of like staying in touch with that side of your culture while you were in the United States?
No.
Hmm.
I'm sure my parents liked it or let me watch it because of that, like
Uh
because
huh.
it helped with the language.
Yep.
But like culturally, I can't even now, like I guess I must have absorbed something. Because
Right.
when we're talking about this overall topic, like
Hmm.
I see on the screen you say, "Can Americans make anime?" And my answer is like yes and no.
Right.
In that anime just means animation. Like they shortened that word and like made it into a Japanese word called anime, and now it's been like re-imported as a different thing, right? But originally it was just like anything animated. And in
Right.
fact, like in Japan, I think when like a Disney Pixar movie comes out, I'm sure they just refer to it as anime. They don't think of it as like American,
Mm.
anime or cartoon.
Right.
Anime just means like it's been drawn,
Right. It's just
whether
the
by
word for
hand
it.
or by computer.
Right. Well, and that's interesting. I figured that was one of the things we were going to get into today because, at least as I understand it, here in the United States and in English speaking areas, it often feels like when people say anime, they're not th- they're referring to the idea of a particular style that has stylistic tropes and story tropes and character
Yeah,
tropes. Um,
and that's
'cause-
and that's where I say, can Americans make anime? No, but I
mhm,
can't. It's very hard to put my finger on it. But like one of the products you mentioned in the notes was Castlevania,
right.
right? And I looked into that, and it is as far as I can tell, it's a U.S. studio that animates it. And the press I found about it says that it was like inspired by or done in the style of Japanese animation,
Hmm.
and yet there's something about it that I don't know if it's just I can tell, like I know, and it just doesn't
Yeah,
feel right to me, and I don't enjoy it as a
I could see
result.
that.
I don't like. I don't want to come off like an elitist
Hmm.
that only the Japanese can make anime. But I think that there must be something in the techniques or the style that is taught and that people learn by watching or studying under other people that has led to the visual style and the animation style that is different.
Right.
And it's not to say that other people can't learn that, because I do believe like a lot of these Japanese anime now use some like South Korean contractors, either like in house or like an
Hmm.
entire studio that's out of house. I know there's one studio called Studio Mir out of South Korea that has
Hmm.
done some anime or like anime related things. They did X-Men 97, which I think visually to me is not only an homage to the original X-Men, but also the style feels more anime than the
Right.
original X-Men, especially the action
Well,
sequences.
so let's talk about what that style is, because like going on that one direct that going in that first definition, if anime is everything that is just animated from Japan, then we're talking about Studio Ghibli and Dragon Ball Z and hentai, which I think like there's such a wide range there that I feel like calling anyone style wouldn't make sense. But with this other definition, then what do you think of as the elements of anime? Like, what makes something
So
anime?
so as far as I know, Studio Ghibli only makes movies, I believe.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if they have they at this point they've probably done TV series, but they're mostly known for movies, right?
Right.
You mentioned Dragon Ball, which is Toei Animation,
Mhm.
and I believe Toei also is the one currently doing One Piece. And then they do a lot of the I've talked about Jump, Weekly Jump, Shonen Jump. I
Mhm.
think they do a lot of those anime that come from that manga book.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other major company that I am aware of is Sunrise Animation. And for me, they're most known for Mobile Suit Gundam. And because of that, they seem to focus a lot on the futuristic, like mech style anime.
Mm.
As for hentai, I have no idea.
I
Hentai refers to what would the translation be? Like the direct translation is like pervert, but basically
right.
like porn, animated porn. And
Mhm.
I actually have like no interest in that. Like I'm being totally honest. I have
Mm.
no interest in that, and so like I've never watched anything or know of any
Right.
major studios or projects.
No, I'm in the same boat. I just reference it because it is animation that comes from Japan. So in terms of, but yeah, I don't know if that would be. But so yeah, so getting to this idea of there being a more specific style of what you're talking about. What do you think are those elements of it?
First off, like the characters.
Mm.
I think anime characters are known for like the big eyes, like on their faces.
Right.
Very expressive eyes. Hair, I think, is a thing, like hair color, especially like weirdly in a lot of the mecha anime in the future. It seems like it's cool to have like blue and purple hair,
Mhm.
and that was a thing. And then the action elements. I really think like there's something about the way that they draw the action elements and animate it that is very different and dynamic. It's very hard to describe a visual medium in
Right.
words, but for me, like I said, like Dragon Ball and then Gundam, like when the robots fight in Gundam, that is it, there's just something about it that is so fluid,
Mhm.
and it makes it very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think of, and we talked about this somewhat during One Piece, and there it was more for comedic value, but I think of it happening as well, is that a lot of the time the animation, particularly of fight scenes, is more meant to convey the overall impression rather than being a artistic shot, rather than being a animated but still kind of shot for shot realistic idea of the fight. You know, the kind of like the someone jumps or moves at high speed, and so all the background behind them becomes very blurred, or things like that. I certainly saw aspects of that in some of the American cartoons I watched. Like you mentioned a couple but not like Ducktales or something, but like Voltron, for example, which my understanding is Voltron is an Americanized version of something that was very Japanese inspired or anime inspired.
Uh, well,
Or
okay. The original Voltron is Japanese.
okay, yeah, so even more.
That was an anime. What was it called? Daigo Ranger or something. No, Go Lion something,
Right.
referring to the lion, and then it had the word go, which is five because there were five
Mhm.
lions. I don't remember the exact name. Juo Go Lion is my best guess right now.
Right.
Um, the new one, yeah, Voltron Legendary Defender, I believe it's called on Netflix from like 2018 ish,
Mhm.
is I believe that might have been Studio Mir, that South Korean company I talked about.
Oh, interesting. Oh, so you're saying that the Voltron that I watched in the '80s, that wasn't even a American version, that was probably just dubbed English voices over an anime?
Yeah, 100%. That like that era, like Voltron, Transform, like the original Transformers, like those
Mm,
were Japanese anime that like Saban or whatever other companies bought and
yeah.
licensed to both like sell toys and then broadcast on TV. And then yeah, they
Mm,
just dubbed it over. Same thing with the original Power Rangers. Other than the Angel Grove, like where the actors are not in their suits and like at
Mhm.
school, all of the action sequences in the original Power Rangers was from Japanese TV and then dubbed over.
Okay. Well, then it makes even more sense that I was thinking those are, like, anime inspired. No, they're just straight up anime, but yeah, because those are the shows I think of that really Voltron and, Transformers especially that had that kind of, like, not realistic anime fight scenes, but much more, impressionistic kind of. Art majors who are listening are horrified at the use of the words I'm using, but I hope you're getting across what I mean.
Yeah, okay. So Studio Mir did do Voltron,
Okay.
Legendary Defender. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, it says DreamWorks, but it also
That's
like
probably
the
the American
actual
company that
animation was by Studio Mir. So yeah,
right.
so they contracted them probably.
That makes sense.
And yeah, like I don't know. It's Voltron again. I enjoyed Voltron,
Mhm.
and I do think like the styling, especially like what we're talking about, the action and the faces, like the animated faces were much closer to what I would think of as anime.
Mhm. Just because I'm thinking of it in that same style, like He-Man I know was not. Was Thundercats? Did that have an anime origin?
I don't think so.
Okay. Those are the 4 that I remember when I was younger. Like later it became the DuckTales and Darkwing Duck and
Mo-
Batman and
Most
all
of the
that.
stuff that got exported in the 80s was like the mecha stuff.
Right.
Robotech
Robotech. Yeah.
Robotech was actually 3 different series that Harmony Gold mashed together, and when they dubbed it, they, like, changed a bunch of the story so that the 3 different series would line up.
12-year-old me was signing into the very, very beginnings of the internet. I remember one of the first things I researched because I had seen like some of a Robotech TV show and I'd read a Robotech novel, and none of the things that I remembered meshed up together. And so I remember trying like going on some rabbit holes to try and find out what's the actual Robotech story, and I could never find it. And that probably helps explain why.
Yeah, the most famous one that they used is the first series, um, was Macross, Super
Uh-huh.
Dimensional Fortress Macross, and they actually reference it in the Robotech cartoon by calling the city Macross Island.
Yeah. Okay. That
And then
makes
the
sense.
other 2, I don't second one was most no, the third one was Mostpedia. I think the second one might actually just be called Southern Cross, but they're completely different products in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
unrelated,
Right.
and it leads to a very convoluted story. Like, I actually know a lot about Robotech.
Okay.
It's be next to Gundam, it's probably the thing I love the most from that era,
I'm taking notes for
and
future episodes.
the Harmony Gold, like, history story that they wrote is completely nonsensical, um, just like designed to fit into what they had to show.
Uh-huh.
And it's funny. I like it. I still have very fond memories of Robotech. I maybe like 6 years ago rewatched a bunch and it doesn't hold up. But I know there's been a lot of Macross. That's been the most
Mm-hmm.
successful. There's been a lot of Macross stuff, and I think there's a new series coming out soon
That's
as
awesome.
well.
We're going to be right back to these questions right after this. Welcome back, everyone. So let me just talk a little bit about what are some of the anime that made it over here, especially in those 80s and 90s and the like. Because you're right, what I remember is a lot of the Robotech stuff, though I didn't necessarily think about it as anime. The first time that I heard the word anime was first of all was the movie Akira, and then was in regard to the TV shows that a lot of my friends who are on the geekier side of things in college, we became our way of sort of getting through finals times was watching this stuff, and that was Ranma One Half and Revolutionary
Mm,
Girl Utena. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about because they're not quite as old as dirt, Ranma One Half was a what I remember at the time in like 1997 being a very funny thing about a kid who changes genders when he falls into the water and has a martial arts teacher and mentor who turns into a great panda when he um, falls into water. And to us in 1997, we thought this was awesomely queer and transpositive. And I think looking back on it today would feel very differently about it. Um, and then Revelation Girl Utna is just fantastically weird in a way that I really don't remember anything about it except that they crack the Earth shell. They crack the shell of the world's egg in the intro credits. Um, what? And then I think we started to get the Spirited Away movies and other things like that. What was kind of your impression of like what was driving that kind of idea of like which ones were coming over and what impression that made about how at least Americans were looking at what anime is?
well, I mean, I don't know. Like that that's above my pay grade.
That's fair. That's fair.
Like the stuff came over that came over, and
Mhm.
people watched it. Like to this day, I can't believe it took so long for Gundam to catch on
Mm.
in the United States. So whatever like politics or business that happened behind the scenes, like it wasn't until I think Gundam Wing that it caught on.
Mhm.
And at that point, I think it had been close to like 15-year franchise, and most of the stuff that I loved, and it just like had no impact. Like, my friends loved Robotech as I did. They loved Dragon Ball, but then like I couldn't talk to them about Gundam because they just had never seen it and had
Right.
no knowledge of it. So if I could like time travel and change one thing about anime, I would say like get Gundam over here faster.
Mhm. Yeah, the phrase Gundam Wing rings some history bells for me, but I don't remember it ever being
Yeah,
something.
that was the one, whatever it was on, like
Right.
Toonami or Nickelodeon or.
But even then, I think as kids, like I said, we didn't know Voltron was anime. You know, that wasn't being talked about at all, or Transformers or anything like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Hmm.
And again,
I don't know,
I
like, I
was
was always aware, maybe because I was also because I was consuming, like, original Japanese anime. It's not
Mhm.
like I watched Voltron in Japanese, but I think because of like, I would get books and stuff, like magazines, like, I knew it existed in Japan, and
Right.
it made more sense to me that way because it's like, "Oh, yeah," like, because there was nothing else, like, in US media that was like that. Like, there was
Yeah.
no one in the US making, like, giant robot cartoons, and
Right.
that's why they imported it, right? But then to me, I was like, any giant robot is from Japan, and that's, like, that is also, like, a stereotype that I had to deal
Interesting.
with at the
Okay.
time, but it was, like, I was aware of it as a kid of being like, "If I want to get more giant robot stuff, I have to get it
Yeah.
from Japan."
Well, and it's so funny because even by the time of like the movie that I think of first in terms of like robots versus kaiju of Pacific Rim, uh, where they very the all the monsters are given the name kaiju, which I understand is a Japanese word that refers to Godzilla and like all the creatures of that ilk, and they call the robots Jaegers, which is a German word.
I
Um,
know, so weird.
and and for me, not being very educated about this, and this is, I was an adult when Pacific Rim came out. It felt to me like it was a genre mash because it was Japanese monsters versus American robots. But I'm hearing from you that no, actually, it's an American movie about two Japanese genres that are clashing, and then actually, like now that I've gone more into the Gojira movies, like there's Mecha Gojira, and all sorts of things like that. So I'm guessing that it's not that these things were much more interlinked than many Americans may have realized.
Yeah. I'm to this day, like, I don't know why they called them Jaegers. It's
Hmm. I'm guessing it may have been for to make it seem not quite so Japanese to an American audience or something like that.
maybe.
What is the Japanese? Is it just mecha, or is there like if kaiju is the word for the monsters, what would the word be for giant robots in Japanese?
I mean, they just use the word roboto.
Okay.
Do they call them mechas in Japanese? The thing is, like in the Gundam universe, they're referred
Hmm.
to as mobile suits.
Oh,
Like in
interesting.
Japanese,
Okay.
mobile suito.
Right.
Um, Trying to think of what else.
Because
I
I guess in
haven't.
that.
It's been a
Sorry. Go
while
ahead.
since I've watched like any Macross in Japanese. So I can't remember what they call
Hmm.
those.
Or even just like the movie that I know is the English name is Mecha Godzilla. Would it
Hmm.
be Mecha Gojira, or would there
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
different?
it was.
Uh huh.
It's Mecha Gojira.
Okay. Interesting. So why is it? Do you think that? I mean, it may be hard to say like why people don't do something well, but I'm trying to think how to best phrase these questions. You talked about how when you've seen Americans or people from other parts of the world trying to do anime, it always feels kind of wrong to you.
Hmm.
Uh, Talk more about that. Do you think it is just that it's just that because you like you have to learn from the people who are doing it and that's all happening in Japan? Is there ways in which that like growing up Japanese gives you an understanding of the kind of issues and characters and things that's talking about? What do you see as
I
the
mean,
connection
yeah,
there?
because like if you're a kid and you watch something, like if you watch a cartoon,
Hmm.
and I did this, like you try to draw the characters, right?
Right.
I draw the characters from cartoons, from the manga I had, and like that's how you initially start learning how to draw. And if you
Right.
continue with it, like if you continue to draw and get better, like you're still mainly focusing on the media you consume.
Right.
And then ultimately, like you'll stop if you become a professional, you stop drawing other people's things and make your own characters. But because you've grown up like with the style of drawing, especially like the faces, I think that's the key aspect to
Mm.
identifying anime. It's just like something about the proportions of the face and the
Hmm.
eyes is different. Like I said, the eyes are bigger. I think often the mouths are bigger as well, and it's just not quite uncanny valley, but there's an unrealistic element to their proportions. But it's
Interesting.
still
Okay.
within reason of like it's not like they look ugly. Oftentimes I feel like they look more beautiful than a corresponding
Hmm.
human might.
Right.
But I think like if you have grown up and seen that style of drawing and drawn it yourself and end up like becoming an artist and creating your own characters in that style, like yeah, I think it's probably just like learned
Hmm.
behavior.
Yeah. So, do you think there's a possibility? It's not, I'm not trying to advocate for one thing or the other here. I'm just curious. As you said, anime is now far, far more accessible, and I think there are a lot of people in Europe and America and Africa, all over the world, for whom anime may be one of or the predominant kind of animation they're seeing. Could you envision someone growing up in Cairo or London or United States or anything like that, for whom they're mostly seeing anime and that's what's shaping it, and so they're going through that same process?
Obviously, yeah. I mean, Studio Mirror, like I was saying, like I don't
Mhm.
know anything about like the human beings there, but
Right.
it's a South Korean studio and it's fairly new. So the first thing they did was Legend of Korra. In fact, I think
Oh, okay.
2012,
Yeah.
Avatar: Legend of Korra. They did the Voltron, and they did, like I said, they. It seems like they did X-Men '97. Those are
Right.
the three things on their credits that I was most familiar with, and looking at them, like they feel more like anime to me than
Yeah.
anything else. Like even like when I was watching Voltron, I was like, oh, like this, and then like you watch the credits, and there's no Japanese names. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it felt much closer to anime, and I
Right.
think you probably have a generation of animators there at that studio that grew up on Dragon Ball
Yeah.
and early One Piece as I did, and all the like the mecha anime I was talking about. And
Uh-huh.
so if you grow up on that stuff again, like and you learn that style, yeah, like
Right.
they're doing it.
Yeah.
I like again, I'm not here to advocate for some kind of like nationalistic definition of anime that only Japanese people can do
Right.
it.
This is
I
not the
think it is
friendship
a, it is
champagne.
it is a result of upbringing, culture, and learned
Right.
drawing behavior, right? And I think like a bunch of these Korean animators have grown up and learned that,
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
and
And so
it looks good to me. Like I love all three of those shows for many reasons, but definitely the animation is part of it. Like it's I keep coming back to this phrase, but it's the action of it.
mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
action in Voltron just like feels much better to me. And
Yeah.
I don't like I would have to like really dig deep to find a US animated like robot thing that I
Right.
enjoy. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Draw better robots, y'all.
But it sounds interesting, and 'cause I like the way you're phrasing it, that it's not it's about growing up with this stuff that until very recently, most people outside of Japan weren't growing up with, rather than it being a national, a kinda like, you have to have a Japanese sensibility or something like that because, yeah, I'd be very curious then to have the same conversation, and it may well be in 20 years when we have lots of people who are growing up drawing robots that way or things like that. That
Yeah. So like
eh
I
Go ahead.
I just googled best American robot anime,
Uh-huh.
and the things it's given me are Robotech, Transformers, Voltron, and Gurren Lagann.
Mhm.
They're all Japanese.
Right.
So just like there's no one's doing it, which is yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's very possible that the people like because there's a whole industry in Japan, right? Like you
Mhm.
can get a job, like you can go to an animation studio and draw robots in this way. In the US, I would imagine like if you are an animator, they're just like there's no studio A working on it. And if there is a studio working on like some kind of robot thing, it's gonna be more
Mhm.
like in the realistic CGI, like the
Right.
Michael Bay Transformers, right? That's essentially animated. Like those
Yeah.
aren't real Transformers. It's animated, but it's different. Like and anime now, a lot of it I think is still like very hand drawn. Maybe
Mhm.
not like with pen and paper, like hand drawn on a computer, touch screen. But I think like that is also probably like I know less about the technical aspects, but
Right.
my guess would be that that is a difference in visually like
Mhm.
how we perceive anime is the
One
hand
thing
drawn versus the computer generated
uh-huh.
motion.
You I may be wrong, but you haven't mentioned this yet, so I assume you haven't seen it. Pacific Rim: The Black. Did you see that?
No, I
So
don't
that
like Pacific Rim as a
that's fair.
franchise, so
Oh, I'd be curious if you just kinda took a look at some of the art of it because it was an animated show continuing the Pacific Rim story, but it was
yeah.
specifically done as an American-Japanese partnership, and I think with mostly Japanese, artists. Um, but also they're doing art of robotic images that were made by a American studio. Um, so yeah, if you get a chance to watch any of that, I'd be curious what you think of it.
Yeah, like I'm looking at the character design and
Uh-huh.
they are very anime. And
Right.
now I'm looking at the production. Series is produced by American company Legendary Television and animated by Japanese studio Polygon Pictures. So there you go. It was
Yeah.
animation was done in
By
Japan
Japanese.
by Polygon. What else have they done that I might be familiar with? So, oh, they did Ghost in the Shell 2, some Ultraman stuff. Oh, I think these are like the bad Gojira anime movies. Yeah, that makes
Uh-huh.
sense that they would
Yeah.
translate that. Yeah, there's like some kaiju stuff.
That makes sense.
Oh, Polygon did some work on the Clone Wars. Interesting.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder if they were oh god, I'm having trouble remembering the name of it, but there was a TV show, not t there was a series of episodes that came out on Disney Plus that was, um, animated Star Wars stories from a number of different that I think either they were all or mostly done by Japanese animators, or maybe
Yeah.
animators,
What was that called? That was Star Wars. Was it Legends? No, Star
yeah, I'm gonna
Wars.
look it up quickly.
No, I want like the. We never talked about that. I mean, you probably did an episode on
Yeah,
those.
one with, Jonah Kellman, actually,
Yeah,
where we both sort of started by saying, "We're not art people, so we're just gonna talk about the story." Star Wars Visions, that was it.
Visions. Yeah, I liked most of those a lot.
Uh-huh.
It was unfortunate that the second one was my least favorite. That was like the weird band one.
Oh, yeah,
And
that's fair.
so I saw that one and I stopped watching for a while.
Yeah. Because the first one is very much clearly not only a anime style, but it's really an homage to samurai stories,
Oh
where
yes,
it's
hundreds
very
super
much
Kurosawa.
yeah, very much a samurai is protecting the village, a samurai is coming to attack the village, but they're using lightsabers instead of katanas.
So I forgot earlier on you mentioned Akira. Like that
Mhm.
is probably like the most famous movie other than like the Ghibli movies, right?
Right.
And influential in its style, especially the motorcycle slide,
Uh-huh.
right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the famous motorcycle slide where the main character Kaneda like comes to a stop, but also like slides his motorcycle sideways and does this skid like into the quote unquote camera, and it's been like oft parodied or just like homages to it. Like it is one of the
Mhm.
most famous moments in anime. But the thing about that movie, it's a terrible movie. And I say this, I read the original manga books. It's like 6 very thick books.
Mhm.
Like each book is probably like 300 pages or so, 2 to 300 pages. 6 volumes of that, and they condensed it into like a 2-hour movie, and it just again doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like
I
what I was saying about Robotech.
I attempted to watch it on 3 different occasions, and granted, this was always during final season of college. I was always exhausted. It's probably also happening at 2 in the morning. I never stayed awake for any of the 3 viewings, so I'm glad to hear that at least.
It is visually stunning. It's exciting, but you end up like with a lot of questions that
Yeah,
were answered in the manga or just like didn't exist because they changed the story so dramatically. And
right.
it reminds me of the viewing experience of like Rise of Skywalker. Like
Mm,
there were so many cuts and edits and like rearranging the story. Like it ends up not making sense, and you're just like, what did I watch?
yeah, that
So
makes sense.
I acknowledge its importance in history, but I would not really want to watch it right now.
That's fair. That's fair. I could see that. Um, we've been talking mostly about animation style. I do know that there are a lot of, and again, maybe this is more the kind of stylistically idea of anime rather than just that the broader, from Japan style. But my impression is, and from talking to you and also from talking to other anime fans, that you got a number of these tropes that are part of animes. The first one that comes to mind is that a character who has sort of a tooth that goes over their lower lip is always going to be a creature of like mischief or chaos or something like that. Um, you give me a blank expression though, which tells me maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about here.
Well, do you have any examples? I'm just
There's a character in My Hero Academia, not My Hero Academia, sorry, Full Metal Alchemist. This is what I saw from recently, and Mary, my partner, was pointing out. Oh yeah, you see how that character has the tooth over the lip. That means they're gonna be causing a lot of chaos. That they're often a young child with mischief.
do you remember the character's name?
I don't. I know another one of the tropes that I think of is the way you talked about in One Piece, how a couple of the characters in that sort of fit into very specific different tropes.
I'm looking through the characters and I don't really see anyone.
It was a side character.
Okay. Yeah, so like one of the things about Japanese anime to me is that it's it's less for, I don't want to put this. Like I was gonna say it's less for kids
Mhm.
than American cartoons, which is to
Right.
say like it's still for kids, but it's like older. I think like the whole cartoons are for kids thing, like the way a lot of people in the United States look
Mhm.
down upon cartoons, right? Up all the way up to like Academy Awards and stuff. Like, oh, like you animated movie you could never win like Best Picture, right? Like that's
Right.
definitely an attitude, and in my opinion, that's ridiculous. But it
Mhm.
stems from this cartoons are for kids, and you
Yeah.
talked about like Saturday morning cartoons, like those are very much for like very young kids, right? Like
Right.
5 to 10 years old. Where I'd say most of the stuff we are talking about in terms of anime is meant more for like young adults, like teenager, like early
Yeah.
teenagers to begin with. Like I certainly started watching earlier than that, but it appealed to me most, I think, during my teenage years. And that's where all of the action elements and a lot of these are fighting
Right.
anime, or the mecha combat anime, like more geared towards young boys.
Yeah.
But there is stuff like there's certainly anime for girls, or for
Mhm.
people who are not interested in fighting.
Right.
um i've
I mean,
i've read a few manga.
the Studio Ghibli movies quite famously almost never involve combat, right? Because Miyazaki is very much about not having fighting in
No, I would say that well, okay, they don't ha- they're not combat oriented. I would
right.
say a lot of them feature war, though.
Mm.
Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, Princess Mononoke has a lot of fighting, but it's not like one-on-one, like personal combat,
Right. And you're never
which
like,
is
"Oh,
what,
this character is such a cool fighter." It's,
yeah.
"Oh, this character is so traumatized by the fighting."
Howl's Moving Castle has war, and then frankly, like he's anti-war, right? Like that's,
Right.
but he's portraying the horrors of war in animation,
Right.
and I feel like that is a that is like a very big distinction when it comes to anime, that it is for a slightly older audience,
Yeah.
and like starting audience. So like the
Right.
starting audience for anime is teenage. Let's just say roughly,
To to
versus
to put it in context, maybe it's more like, uh, Batman the Animated Series than Gummy Bears or something like that.
exactly, yeah. That's a pretty good pairing that I often watched back to back, I think, or
Yeah.
close to in those hours. And yeah, because of that, I think the appeal of anime can last longer, all the way to well into
Right.
adulthood for us. And I think like it it makes it feel to me more serious. Like it
Mhm.
deals with things like serious topics and has moments of death. Like Robotech, the original Robotech had multiple character deaths. In the Macross segment, what was his name? Roy, I think, who was the protagonist mentor. He
Mhm.
dies in combat, and it was like a huge moment in the series and
Spoilers.
for the characters. And it was such a huge contrast to the other main like war-based cartoon I was watching at the time, GI Joe, where famously every time a fighter plane blows up, they were contractually obligated by like the code of the studio or the network to show the pilot escaping in a parachute and
Yep.
surviving. Like they were told directly, you cannot imply death. and it was, to me, like it made Robotech, I guess, cooler to kid me that they had
Yeah,
death. But to me, like looking back at it now, it meant it was more real and hence more mature, right?
right.
So as a kid growing up, like as you go through those ages, it's like, oh, like now I get to watch a cartoon where someone dies, and like
Yeah, it
I'm
was a big
growing
deal.
up, and like the what I'm watching is growing up.
Yeah. Well, we've gone on for a while, and this is obviously a topic we can go on at great length about. I'm hoping we get some good feedback and can keep discussing it. What I want to quote, you mentioned something like Legend of Korra being done. Sounds like a lot of the animation was very much an homage to Japanese style, or was done by Japanese animators. Uh, and certainly its precursor show, Avatar: The Last Airbender, we talked a lot about how it's very clearly anime inspired. What's kind of your feeling over what do you think are good examples of shows that are not trying to be anime, but are still very clearly made by people who have been very influenced by anime in positive ways?
Um,
Well, first, I would just say, like, would you describe Avatar: The Last Airbender in those kind of terms?
no, I mean yes, but not as much as Korra.
Right.
Once you get to Legend of Korra, it's and especially like knowing now about the studio that made it seems much more clear.
Mhm.
Avatar still has that cartoon aesthetic to it,
Mhm.
and I don't know. It's just maybe the colors too. Like the way they use colors is more cartoony than
Mm.
anime.
Yeah.
Again, like here I am like trying to describe colors
Right.
in
That's fair.
a podcast. But if you've seen both, like you know what I mean, right?
Right.
Matthew, like I don't know if it makes sense, but
No, I
there's
think it
something
does, and
about the vibrancy of the colors in The Legend of Korra.
I think it's really true, yeah, and I'm not much of an art person, but I definitely agree with you, and I think, like, when I hear Avatar described as very anime-like, I think is much more about the characters and the journey and the kind of world building than it is necessarily the artistic style.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. To me, like it's the art style
Yeah.
that
No, it makes sense. That's an important.
reeks, quote unquote, reeks of anime.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling on your question. Like, I don't know what I would say about that.
Mhm. No, it makes sense. I mean, especially if it is, for you, the understanding was very specific to the art style, not necessarily the story and characters. And yeah, I think it probably there aren't any good examples right now, or very few, once we're not knowledgeable about.
Like the thing about Avatar, The Last Airbender, is that it's 3 seasons and it's done and it told like a very good story
Mhm.
and packaged it well. Anime is often ongoing
Right.
because of the nature of the original the IP of the manga, and like
Mhm.
we've commented on about One Piece, it's been ongoing for 1,000 plus episodes.
Right.
And I think there's something we haven't talked about too much about, yeah, like about the storytelling of
Mhm.
it, of the nature of the way that the stories have not necessarily have to, but that they do keep going
Right.
and don't repeat. I think that's a key too. American comic books, like thinking mostly about like DC and Marvel, like superhero comic books, they do this thing with the universes and time, right? Where
Mhm.
they often have like infinite crisis and then they reset
Right.
and start retelling stories with different writers and different um, pencilers and artists. Whereas in Japan, each manga and as a result, each anime is done by one person, like one artist is
Mm.
writing the story, is drawing through the entire run. Obviously, when it comes to the animation, they're going to have different people working on it over the years, but
Right.
they have to base their art style on the original artist and stay true to that. And I think there has to be something there about that's a key aspect of
Oh,
what
for sure.
makes an anime
Mhm.
is that is the production
Yeah.
style all coming from one mind.
That makes a lot of sense, both in terms of like there's probably gonna be much more consistency there, but
Yeah.
also in terms of, and you're not gonna have, like you said, it's not like, Iron Man originally set during is a warmonger in the Vietnam War, and then in Central America, and then in the Middle East, etc. You're not gonna have that, but also like if your intention is for these characters to never end, that both opens up a lot of doors for character growth, but also restricts them a lot because of what makes this character interesting is this character flaw. You solve that character flaw, and well, now you got to do something totally different with that character. Um, but let me ask you though, because, and again, maybe this is just more the stuff that makes it the United States, and it is more in the minority. But part of what I think of with when I think of anime is those long shows, but also things like Cowboy Bebop or Yuri on Ice or other stuff like that, where it is one single season and one pretty complete story. Are those much more the exception, or is there a lot of those, but just they kind of get dwarfed by the 30 season ones?
Well, I don't really know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's I would have to look into like how where Cowboy Bebop came from and like how it was made. Like, was
Right.
it? It's a series, right? Like, it's originally a series
Mm-hmm.
because there is a lot. There are a lot of movies that get made,
Right.
anime movies that get made in Japan. Series Sunrise, 26 episodes. I don't know. I don't know why it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my
That's fair.
guess would no, it is based on a manga. It says, but it was a very short run manga. It was only a year and a half. Hmm. So I don't know. My Without looking into the history of Cowboy Bebop, my guess would be that it was canceled or the artist like stopped for whatever reason, and like
Uh-huh.
that's what we get. But if I had to guess, yeah, the it should have gone kept going
Right.
in the
That's
in the
fair.
way that I've been talking about.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like when we talk about Batman, like
Mm-hmm.
who do you credit as like making Batman who he is as a character, right?
Right.
Like, do you go back to what's it, Bob Kane? Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah,
original, the creator?
I
Do you talk about Frank Miller, who had like several influential books? Jeff Loeb, Grant Morrison, like these are all people who have
yeah,
worked on Batman and have had influence that other people have riffed off of.
yeah.
But it's
I
led to kind of like a very chaotic character that often is probably inconsistent over
oh
the
yeah, I mean,
decades.
I think even if you just look at just the TV and film adaptations of Batman, trying to say that the Michael Keaton character, the Christian Bale character, and the Batman 66 character are all the same character is basically impossible. They're fundamentally different people all wearing the same hood. And I think that's true of the comics as well. Is as just American publishing has changed, and that's true for Wonder Woman. It's true for Superman. It's true for Captain America. For any of these characters, have been published over literal generations. That they've changed quite a bit. So
Yeah.
it makes sense.
And I think that is probably, as I said, a key element of anime's appeal is that you can have a character like Goku in Dragon Ball. And like I said, like I grew up with this character and took a break during some of the meh projects and like have recently I watched the thing and it's like, yep, that's still Goku. Like
Yeah,
fundamentally the character is still the same. And I think there's a comfort to that.
yeah. Well, and we should definitely talk more about Goku because all I really know about Goku is that he's very often paired with Superman. Not in like in a story, but in terms of just people thinking about them as very similar characters. And just
Mm.
last week, we did a whole episode on the Superman type. It was about an interview with Alan Moore, but also we got into a lot the Superman archetype of the character who's trusted to not do anything wrong with his powers. So it might be
Oh
interesting to
yeah.
have a conversation about that trope and how does Goku fit into it and how are they different or similar?
Yeah, I absolutely. The
Yeah.
like Goku is like unfazably naive and innocent. Like, especially like originally, like there was a story where a character uses a technique that like goes into someone's soul
Mhm.
and expands the evil in their soul until they blow up. And Goku didn't blow up because he had zero evil within his heart.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I think it'd be a great conversation. Maybe we can get Jessica Plummer in on that one. So, our resident Superman expert. Well, Riki, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Is there any other kind of last things you want to say to people? We're gonna in our bonus section do some recommendations of anime and some maybe kind of foretellings of topics we'll discuss in the future. But just for now, any other last thoughts you want to have on this conversation?
I was going to recommend something, so I'll save that. And what I will say is to you in the audience, please write in with feedback because a lot of this, I tried to do some research on what studios are actually making the things that I was watching and like what their influences
Hmm.
are. But a lot of this is just like my vague impressions and opinions about anime. And first off, like I don't think there should be a set like box that we put things in. So when
Hmm.
I say like something is or is not anime, like I'm not trying to like draw clear lines, but I think like just talking about it, it feels like there are aspects that I'm sensing in them. So I would love to hear from you, especially if you watch like more diverse anime than I do, because we didn't talk at all about like kind of the high school like romance drama anime. Like
Hmm.
that's very much its own genre that
Right.
I don't watch at all.
I know Yuri
So
on Ice is part of the sports genre, which is yet
yeah,
another
yeah.
whole thing that.
I have watched Haikyuu, which is the volleyball one, and I enjoy that. But even that, the way that the volleyball is drawn is like
Hmm.
very action, almost combat
Yeah.
ish. So I'd be curious to see like Yuri if they do the same thing with the ice dancing.
My first of all, I need to point out as someone who has a number of people in their family who compete in these sports, ice dancing and ice skating are two different things. Um, but m- my memory, I've seen it a couple of years ago, is that there's a little bit of that, but most of it is hyper realistic to the point where they actually had like professional ice skaters. They did like motion capture to like get some of it,
Ooh,
and that
that's cool.
apparently during the Winter Olympics, around the time that it was coming out, enough like all the Olympic ice skaters would get together in Olympic Village and watch this together and be like, "Yeah, this is really accurate." And at least one person I know at one of the more recent Olympics did their ice skating routine that was basically as close as they could to a redoing
Oh,
of the final. So to me, that just cultural interlap is
that's awesome.
amazing, right? Yeah. So we'll talk about that. Definitely, like you said, lots of ways to contact us. All of them on the show notes, all of them on the website. Let us know what you think. What's your feedback? What's the anime you love? What's the things that you think of? Like, what is stuff maybe that we're not knowing about that you actually think of as kind of anime similar? Nimona is one actually that comes to mind now that I don't know if you've seen, Riki. That's sometimes heard
No.
referred to as kind of anime similar. So let us know. For the members, we'll be back very shortly with your bonus content. For everybody else, thank you so much. We have spoken. Star Wars Generations is an Ethical Panda podcast, part of the True Story FM network. If you enjoyed the show, please share it and leave a rating or review in your podcast app. The best way to support us is by becoming a member. Find information and all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.